She put a pot on she hair and gone. Them a the first one out on the dam. Basket on she head, bucket in each hand, hold up on she frack, I wanna she grandson. To the market, them a go. For the morning, the day is dawning. For Crow to give the villagers a warning. Rise and shine, the birds them a sing. All animal take turn as them join in the waking. Crow, dagaba, donkey, bray, horse, and they even duck a quack. Crow, dagaba, donkey, bray, horse, and they even duck a quack. Come and hear this sweet story that tell the people about life in the country. All day a back down, me now a come home. Inaga, jackass guy for fetchy load. Cockle shy hand, bag over shoulder, running by his side, a Rexy and Rover. From the farm, them a come. Sun a go down, but up the river. Some washing clothes, some folks are bathing at the water. Fisherman, they catch them a bring. From a canoe boat, man, them start offloading.
All right, life in the country indeed. Good night to all of you, every single one of you, and welcome to Anansi Web Education. We're back again with our program. President David Arthur Granger is with us, as always, ready to rock and roll. Tonight we are talking about the sugar industry. And as you know, the lies love to peddle by some folks. We'll be giving you facts tonight on the sugar industry and the estates and so forth to debunk the propaganda. But before we get into that, President Granger, how are you? I see you smiling and all decked out tonight. How are you, sir?
Well, I'm happy to be on this program. Every week I'm coming into the homes of Guyanese at home and in the diaspora. And when I think of the theme song of Anansi Web Education, life in the country, I just recall how many rural families are dependent on the sugar industry. Most Guyanese are descendants of persons from Africa and Asia, India and China, and also from Madeira, who came to work in the sugar industry. So we're all concerned about the sugar industry. It was a rural enterprise. It's a labor-intensive enterprise. So when you talk about life in the country, my thoughts go back to the sugar industry. It goes back to the people who relied on the sugar industry. And I think they are now regretting the damage that was done to that industry by the People's Progressive Party, a party which claimed to like rural Guyana and like rural folk, but they really damaged that sugar industry badly. And this evening we will look at the damage done to the East Demerara estates. I think that is where the damage was felt most. We still have the sugar industry existing in East Babis and West Demerara, but the damage in East Demerara was tremendous, and of course is irreversible. I don't think you could ever reestablish sugar industry in East Demerara after what the PPP did between 1992 and 2015. But life in the country goes on, and we, the survivors, on programs like Anansi Web Education, must try to make sure that no party could damage the workers and the villages as severely as the PPP did between 1992 and 2015.
Well said. Thank you so much. And for those of you who have now joined us, wherever you are, good night and welcome, or good morning, wherever you are. Good night. Welcome to Anansi Web Education. We're talking about the sugar industry and how the PPP destroyed that industry. There's always been this false perception that the sugar industry is only concentrated on one particular ethnic group. President Granger is correct. All Guyanese worked on the sugar estates. They continue to work on the sugar estates, on the quarantine. A lot of folks, it's a mixture of between African and Indians, of course, but they've always, even before indentureship, Africans have worked the sugar estates, the industry. and they continue to. So it's not a one-sided, somewhat kind of thing. It's a Guyanese thing, and don't have people paint this impression, give you this perception that it's just a one ethnic group something. It is not. And let me just take this time out to say good evening to the Parks, the Grays, and all those hardworking sugar workers. Haridat, Hardawar, my good friend on the quarantine, and all those folks who have worked and continue to work in the sugar industry. President Granger, let me just say, welcome all of our listeners as well. You say life in the country. I remember on the quarantine, people get up 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, and by 5:30. Oops, did I say 5:30 in the morning?
Yeah, I think many Guyanese will not remember what happens at 5:30 in the morning anymore.
Indeed. Let's get down to business here. Thank you all again for joining us. Today, we talk about the Guyana Sugar Corporation and the fact that it's employed over 20,000 workers when the PNC administration left office in 1992. Gaisuco employed about 15,000 workers when the PPP administration left office in 2015. This meant that the PPP removed 5,000 or over 5,000 workers off the payroll and closed several East Demerara estates between 1992 and 2015. I repeat, Gaisuco employed about 15,000 workers when the PPP administration left office in 2015. This meant that the PPP removed, now listen carefully, they removed over 5,000 workers off the payroll and closed several East Demerara estates between 1992 and 2015. Anansi Web Education, our program examines this topic, the PPP's destruction of the East Demerara sugar estates, with the aim of addressing the following questions. First question, President Granger. Why did the PPP's destruction of the East Demerara sugar estates occur after 1992?
Well, it was the opportunity provided by the PNC's loss of office in 1992. So the PPP, this is the first time since nationalization in 1976, 16 years after nationalization, it's the first time the PPP is getting its hands on the sugar industry. And in previous Anansi programs, we dealt with the struggle for union recognition in the sugar industry in 96-4, bloody struggle, when the GAU called a 165-day strike and hundreds of persons were killed. So this is now the PPP's moment to shine when they are in sole control of the sugar industry. So from 1992, we started to see changes. In the colonial period and under the PNC, there were systems in which young cadets, bright cadets were selected for managerial and technical positions in the sugar industry. And many of them were highly trained at universities overseas and elsewhere. And there was a core of experienced but committed engineers and managers, soil scientists, and so on in these in the estates. I myself, as a youngster, actually worked on Sapphire Estate. What is now Sapphire used to be an experimental station on the Bookers, where you test the sucrose content and the soil and different conditions for growing sugar. It was like a field laboratory. So the industry was highly it's a highly scientific industry. But when the PPP got in, they were more selective, and a lot of the educated people, a lot of the experienced managers were driven out of the industry. The PPP started to run it on political lines. Well, once you are producing a commodity for the international market, you have to be very careful with your technology and your science and your managerial systems. So from 1992, the PPP started to control the sugar industry as if it was a branch of the PYO or PPP. So the relations with GAU which were assumed to be cordial, started to sour. And many people, many young school leavers and university graduates who were previously attracted into the industry started to leave. And of course, it was a period in which the PPP did not seem to have any interest in retaining certain types of persons. But the industry has always been, especially at the grassroots, a multi-racial industry. And when you look in certain areas like East Babis, East Bank Babis, East Bank Demerara, West Bank Demerara, even on the quarantine course, you'd see a mixture of persons. So when the PPP tried to run the industry as a party, a branch of the party, I think we started to run into some serious problems here. So 1992 was key because they inherited an industry with over 20,000 workers. But by the time they left office 23 years later, over 5,000 or more workers had quit or had been removed deliberately. And tonight we're looking particularly at the East Demerara estates, and so we must see 1992 as being a watershed year in which an industry which was not doing particularly well became a disaster in the 23 years after 1992. So 1992 was critical because the PPP started to run the sugar industry as if it was a branch of the party, and instead of being a modern agro-industrial complex based on foreign markets.
Thank you so much, President Granger. And it is true, the evidence is there that the PPP believes that the Gaisuco is part, it's an arm of the PPP, and they give that false perception of what the industry is like and the reflection of the workers. There's especially in the East Quarantine Berbice and other parts where sugar estates are, they have different groups, ethnic groups working there, whether East Indians, whether Africans, they're all working the estates, and the PPP wouldn't want you to know that part. But as we move to the second part of tonight's discussion, the second question, who was responsible for the destruction of the East Demerara estates?
Well, the answer is easy, frankly, because East Demerara estates comprise, Diamond on the East Bank, and then you had Ogle, LBI, and more Lusignan. When the PNC left office in 2015, in 1992, there were 8 estates functioning in the entire country. But the PPP, in its wisdom, shut down Diamond, amalgamated all of the East Demerara estates into one unit called the East Demerara estates. So it was not, they were not being run as separate estates. They were being run like one conglomerate. And they appointed their own chairman of the board. They appointed the Minister of Agriculture, and they appointed the chief executive officers of the Guyana Sugar Corporation. So at all levels, ministerial, the board, and the chief executive officer, the actual corporation, were controlled by the PPP appointees. I think even now, in the present time, I think a member of the PPP is being appointed as the CEO. So that's how they run it. They run it as an arm of the party, rather than as a modern industrial enterprise looking and searching for foreign markets. So who was responsible? PPP was responsible because they appointed the chairman of the board. They appointed the board members. They appointed the CEO. They appointed, the Minister of Agriculture. But they kept changing, and no matter what you do, as long as the certain principles of modern industrial practice are not observed, the industry will collapse. And this is what happened. A modern industry cannot work on political principles. Even at the Gawu Labor College, as you know, there are two labor colleges, the Critchlow Labor College, run by the TUC, and the Gawu Labor College, run by Gawu. At one stage, the students, they had to study Marxism-Leninism. Well, I don't know Marxism-Leninism is efficient producer of sugar, but this is the sort of thing that was happening. The other problem is that the relations with Gawu from the 1960s, Gawu was treated as a part of the PPP, but you cannot run an industry by simply patronizing the union. The union is in the business of looking after the interests of its workers, and the union kept making demands, and the PPP seemed incapable of resisting the union. And as a result of that, the union would call strikes and they'd be given dollops of money. And when, of course, it became necessary to apply industrial principles, they wanted to close Diamond, the union took them to court. How took PPP to court? It's almost incredible for students of politics in Ghana. But this is exactly what happened. And the PPP was forced to pay severance pay to the Gawu sugar workers. And the Gawu was out of control. It continued to call strikes and became unmanageable, So the PPP, which thought it was in control of the workers and control of the unions, actually could not control the strikes taking place in the sugar industry. The sugar workers are not a set of docile people. They wanted to see proper management. They knew it was hard work and they knew what they put into it, and they could not tolerate the mismanagement, the fact that the equipment, the machinery was not being repaired or replaced. Some of the managers were not as well trained as previously, and they want the best for their families. Life is hard in the sugar estates, but the PPP underestimated the need to have proper equipment, proper management practices, proper industrial relations, proper pay, proper negotiations, business-like negotiations with the union. And for all these reasons, after 1992, the PPP did not have it easy. And after the death of the Jaggers, things got worse. From the start of this century, of 2000 thereabouts, because at that time, as you know, everybody knows that Guyana was a British colony, and it was the beneficiary of favorable financial support from the European Union. That is, Guyana Sugar got access to the European Union at preferential rates which were more favorable than international rates. But because the EU decided to adhere to international best practice and have free trade, it meant it could not give preferential rates. It had to allow the entry of sugar from everywhere, as Brazil, India, China, and Mauritius and elsewhere. So Guyana was not able to compete because the favoritism that Guyana favored in its relation to sugar just contravened industrial practice. So people became complacent, the union became complacent, the party became complacent. And as a result of that, when the European Union withdrew its preferential framework, the sugar started to face problems. It had to stand on its own 2 feet, so to speak, and it started to falter. So the responsibility for the destruction of the East Demerara estates is strictly a matter of the PPP. They amalgamated the estates. They followed bad practices. The wage bill continued to hit the ceiling, and they actually could be accused of maltreatment or mistreatment of the workers. They were not maintaining the fields. They were not maintaining the factories, and they felt that they could just continued to win the support of the workers who were who were an important voting bloc. And this is the big problem for the PPP. PPP was very confident that the bulk of the sugar workers would vote for the PPP. So they did their best not to attempt to alienate them, to win their favor. And as a result of that, the whole country had to suffer to make sure that voting bloc was kept intact. So they followed bad practice because they thought it was good for elections. And the result is that we all suffer. So in terms of responsibility, the PPP just followed bad practices, bad relations, with the unions, bad, management, of the fields and the factories, and of course, they weren't able to command a significant part of the international market, even though the industries in some other Caribbean countries were collapsing. Gaisuko and the PPP administration could have filled that void. Sometimes, it is almost embarrassing when you travel overseas and you see some packaged brown sugar. The sugar come from Louisiana or Belize or Mauritius. And the most embarrassing thing is that some of the sugar is called Demerara sugar. But for a long time, that sugar did not come from Demerara at all. It came from other countries like Mauritius. So there was a big problem in the PPP, and they just followed bad political advice and led to the ruination. So on the East Demerara, particularly, they attempted amalgamation. They wanted to migrate the industry from East Demerara to East Berbice, and I think they completely mismanaged that process. The result is that they destroyed the industry in East Demerara altogether, and they thought that the Skeldon estate would be that silver bullet that would, the genius who invented Skeldon thought that would solve all the problems of the sugar estate, but he's completely wrong, and nothing's coming out of Skeldon now. And when you look at what happened, even in West Demerara, a place like Wales, the machinery, the factory was not being maintained. East Berbice, even in Rosal Kanji, and certainly Diamond, just the maintenance was so poor that some of it is just good to scrap. In my own visit there, as I mentioned before, the workers were working at cannibalizing spare parts from other factories. So the PPP really messed up big time in East Demerara, big time. They tried to move it out of East Demerara, and it was completely mismanaged.
A disaster indeed, completely mismanaged. Our third question, what has been the impact of the PPP's destruction of the East Demerara sugar estates? It's tremendous. We saw the record from 1992 to 2015. The PPP reduced the sugar workers, sugar industry, by over 5,000. And then sugar estates were closed, bad investments, and people were becoming frustrated. And then back to the question, what has been the impact of the PPP's destruction of the East Demerara sugar estates?
The immediate impact was the retrenchment of workers, dismissal of workers, the reduction of the workforce. And of course, it is accepted that in communities close to sugar estates, there is a spin-off effect or impact because of the way the sugar industry developed. In colonial times, it was prudent or expedient for the British to have the sugar workers living close to the estates. And they became dependent, Shops were open, people would open different types of facilities to support the workers. Very often, a man would be working, his wife would be working, and sometimes the village, would be providing materials and so on to support the estate. So the estate became part of the community. Many of them were living on the estate, and of course, the workers got tremendous amount of benefits. If you read about the benefits that sugar workers got, in terms of not only NIS, but also in terms of, medical benefits and holidays with pay and other facilities, it was posh. It was posh. So when the carpet was pulled from under the sugar industry, all those facilities were removed. And it led to not only unemployment, but it also led to disenchantment. Young school leavers who in the 60s used to be rushing to become Booker cadets, who were rushing to qualify to get a job in Booker's, they said this is a dead, dying industry. And they no longer were interested in seeking careers in an industry which was on a point of collapse. So it had an immediate impact, but it also had an eventual or secondary impact because it became an unattractive profession for young school leavers, young graduates. So I would say that the impact has to be seen on two levels. One is immediacy and one is long-term impact, but it also has to be seen at different levels. That one, you're not training or attracting young educated school leavers, your management will eventually suffer because sugar is a peculiar industry. It is not something you could go into and come out. People are born into the sugar industry. They live sugar. They understand sugar industry. They understand the weather. They understand the soil. They understand the work, the relationship. And if you don't have that sort of familiarity with the sugar industry, it is difficult to just get it by just signing an employment contract. And the result is that chain was broken because the PPP tried to politicize the industry, which had previously, regardless of the fact it was British, it was highly professional. And there are a lot of professionals in Guyana who owe their cadetship and the tertiary education to training in the sugar industry. But all that was lost. The PPP never realized it. They just thought that, get rid of X because he's not one of us. Or, and the result is that other people look and see the slaughter that was taking place and just decided to migrate or to go to other industries. So the treatment of human element in the sugar industry had a double impact, an immediate impact in terms of dismissals and a long-term impact in terms of making the industry unattractive. And if you spoke to people who joined the industry, well, maybe 50 years ago was a long time, 60 years ago, before nationalization, it was perhaps one of the most attractive places for young people to enter at all levels. But after the PPP, the catastrophe, people are not interested in following a career in the sugar industry. You do a check now. Nobody's looking forward to become a manager in the sugar industry anymore. The PPP made that prospect very unattractive.
Well said. Lots of people in the sugar industry, sugar estates, worked in the sugar estates. Many might be watching tonight. Some might be our friends or relatives. It cuts across the board. The unfortunate perception is that the PPP tries to create this impression that it's a one ethnic group something, and that the coalition targeted that particular one ethnic group. Again, that false impression that the sugar estate is just about one ethnic group, when the evidence is clear that it's not. Just thought I made a point a bit clear. Again, as we close off tonight's program, talking about the destruction of the sugar estates, the sugar industry by the PPP regime. Final question, President Granger. How did the PPP's destruction of the sugar estates affect East Demerara workers?
The sugar industry is more than an industrial enterprise. It is part of Guyanese history. I just want to, iterate that most Guyanese are the descendants of persons who were brought in this country, either voluntarily or involuntarily, to work in sugar estates. And it is part of our life, it's part of our culture. And even during colonial periods, the life of the sugar worker was supported by social and cultural activities. Many well-known cricketers in Guyana grew up in rural areas and hit their first ball on a community center run by the sugar industry. And when you fly over the coastline of this country, you will see that many sugar estates had or were close to community centers or sports grounds. And that's where that's where many sugar workers, became world-class cricketers. So there was a social aspect, and sometimes several members of one family would be associated with the sugar industry or with one particular estate. Medical benefits, housing benefits, the sugar industry labor welfare fund. It is difficult to measure the impact of the sugar industry on Guyanese people. So when you shut down half a dozen estates, when you shut down the whole East Emirate estate, you're bound to have an impact on the social, cultural, and economic lives of thousands of people. So just to say, 5,000 people were removed by the PPP is not enough, because those 5,000 people had, wives and children, and all of them were dependent on the sugar estate. So the impact is difficult to measure, but what damage has been done is difficult to repair, because no government, well, I shouldn't say no government, it's unlikely that any government will attempt to correct the damage of the PPP, to repair the damage of the PPP is done at East Emirate. I mean, when you look at Diamond, it is now a housing estate. When you look at the, Ogle or Elmore, it's dead. The PPP killed it. So the impact is irreversible, and the PPP has to bear full responsibility. You cannot blame the PNC. They cannot blame APNU. This is all they worked between 1992 and 2015. And I think the Guyanese people must understand the big lie that the PPP is trying to tell the Guyanese people, that the industry was damaged by the APNU. The PPP damaged the APNU, damaged the industry. And APNU in 5 years could not repair the damage that the PPP has done. And anyone who tries to repair the damage has to reverse some of the terrible mistakes the PPP made. And I just hope that the efforts made by the APNU FC to concentrate production in those three areas, East Berbice, Quarantine, based on Albion, not Skeldon, Albion, West Berbice, based on Blaymont, West Demerara, based on Lyford. That is the future of the sugar industry. APNU embarked on a reorganization plan, and those three hubs, East Berbice, West Demerara, will see the future of Guyana sugar. And I just hope that the PPP just turns away from those terrible practices it initiated in 1992, the closures and the dismissals and the other actions which failed to rehabilitate the machinery, failed to pay attention to the field work. And it just thought that by putting people from the central committee here, there, and trying to have close relations with GABU could make sugar succeed. No. It's a highly competitive commodity on the international market, and the PPP simply followed bad practices. And I must stop telling the Guyanese people lies about how the sugar industry in East Demerara was destroyed. PPP destroyed the sugar industry in East Demerara. That's it.
Thank you so much, President Granger. They destroyed the PPP, destroyed the sugar industry in not just Demerara, but out the other estates, whether it's Berbice, Corentinese, Berbice, West Coast, wherever they have destroyed it. Earlier, we mentioned that the industry is about not one ethnic group. This reminds me of a protest under the PPP in Berbice, that is. And look at the ethnic composition. Look at the ethnic makeup of these sugar workers who are fighting for better treatment, but instead they were arrested and locked up. Take a look at their ethnic composition there. Take a good look, guys, and you'll understand. But then again, the PPP tries to create this false impression, false perception that the sugar industry is just of one ethnic group, and that when the coalition, when under David Granger's presidency, it's as though you guys were targeting the sugar industry because of ethnicity, when in fact it wasn't the case. It's not the case at all. Thank you for shedding light on the truth and the destruction of the sugar industry under the PPP regime. And we just touched on Demerara. We haven't gone to East Berbice and other parts as yet. They have been commission of inquiry under the PPP regime because they knew they were failing. They knew that sugar was failing, and they knew the PPP couldn't do anything about that. We saw the reduction of sugar workers from 1992 to 2015. Over 5,000 workers were sent packing. Thousands of workers couldn't do anything, especially out of crop times. The PPP couldn't address that. They have no alternative. Actually, they still don't have any alternative. And today, 2024, we're still hearing, they're coming out gradually to say that the sugar industry isn't working. As a matter of fact, it's because of the incompetence of the PPP regime. Sugar workers, stop being used by an incompetent regime. President Granger, thank you so much for your time as always, right here on Anansi Web Education. Continue with your kitchen garden. Continue. I'm told that you get up at 5:30 or before 5:30 every morning.
Well, I get up before 5:30, but I don't have any meetings planned for 5:30.
Thank you so much. Please convey our regards to your other half, that is former First Lady, Sandra Marie Granger. Give her our regards, please. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, and good night to you and your viewers.
Thank you. And to all of our viewers, listeners, wherever you are, thank you so much. Have a blessed rest of the night until next week, same place, same time. Don't forget, as we leave you this evening, the PPP destroyed, and they continue to destroy the sugar workers, the sugar industry. They have no plans, none whatsoever. God bless you all.
She put a pot on she hair and gone. Them a the first one out on the dam. Basket on she head, bucket in each hand. Hold up on she frock, I wanna she grandson. To the market, them a go. For the morning, the day is dawning. For Cockacrow to give the villagers a warning. Rise and shine, the birds them a sing. All animal take turn as them join in the waking. Cockacrow, dagaba, donkey, bray, horse, and they even duck a quack. Cockacrow, dagaba, donkey, bray, horse, and they even duck a quack. Come and hear this sweet story that tell the people about life in